Welcome to episode 19 of The Mobile Classroom, the video podcast where we demonstrate today's most popular technologies. I'm James Messer, and this episode is all about how to protect your wireless network. Now, this is something that we've run into as wireless networks have really taken off. Almost everybody seems to have a wireless network in their house, and why wouldn't you? You have so many devices in your house now that can be on your wireless network. Your television is connected to your network. Your mobile phones can connect to your network. You've got wireless technologies all over your house. But one of the challenges, of course, is that it's becoming a little more difficult to manage the security of those things. You don't want your neighbors using your network or seeing the devices on your network, and you certainly don't want to be involved with what's going on at their house either. In this episode, we're going to talk about how you can look at your wireless network configuration in your router and determine if it's secure. We'll also give you some tips and some tools you can use to see what wireless networks are around you. There may be an opportunity not only to make your network more secure, but also more efficient. We'll see all of that in this episode. This episode is one of our absolutely free mobile classroom podcasts. You may be aware, if you've been watching our podcast for a while, that every third podcast we do is one that is exclusive for mobile members. So last week we did a podcast on Microsoft Office Beta 2010, and that was one that was just for our mobile members. So we're back this week with a podcast that is absolutely free from beginning to end. Anyone can watch every single second of this particular podcast. If you are a mobile member, however, you can watch this podcast in HD resolution. If you're not a mobile member, it's a little bit less resolution, still looks pretty nice, but mobile members can really appreciate that 720p high definition resolution that we bring, and that's something, just a little something extra we provide for our mobile members. If you'd like to learn more about membership on the Mobile Classroom, you can go to our website and read all about it at themobileclassroom.com/members. When you start looking at wireless protection, it really is talking about more than one particular thing. It's not just one workstation or one computer or one device. It's many different devices, and those devices do many different things. So we're going to start our focus in this episode by looking at your wireless access point, your wireless router, and determine what's really going on inside of that device. How is it configured? Then we're going to shift our focus over to the devices that are on your network, the workstations, the computers, the laptops, the mobile phones, whatever you have that is on your wireless network. And we'll look at the settings for that because there are some things we can do on the workstation that's important as well. But remember, you're not always at your house. You may be in a coffee shop. You may be in a hotel that has wireless connectivity. And there are a number of security concerns there as well. We should also think about how we can protect our computers and our wireless devices when we are away from our house, when we are away from our protected network. And we'll go through some technology specific to personal firewalls that you could run on your workstation to make sure that you are secure no matter where you might go. Let's start with the security that is on your wireless access point. And I use this term wireless access point the same way I'd use the term wireless router. These days, you can go to a store and purchase a device that can be either a wireless access point or a wireless router. In most cases, if the only thing that we have in our environment, in our home, is one wireless device, it's probably a wireless router. What you're doing is plugging in your internet connection directly into the back of this router, and it is routing that information from the internet directly to the network that you happen to be on, your wireless network in your house. You can also plug in wired connections usually to those devices as well. If you already have a router or a router is provided to you by your internet service provider and you simply want to extend the capabilities of that network to be wireless or create perhaps even another wireless device in your network, you would want to just buy an access point. You don't want to have multiple routers inside of your house. I guess you could, but it's a little bit overkill for what you're trying to do. So generally you have one wireless or one router in your house, and then you might have one access point. In most cases though, just like this device, this is a wireless router and an access point, and inside of this also a firewall, all in one unit. And usually that's what we're purchasing, is this all-in-one device that does everything. When we start looking at securing the wireless part of this, we want to think about two major pieces. One is we want to restrict access to this device. We want to be sure that the only people that are able to use the network in our house are the devices in our house. Very often I see and hear about people who are using wireless networks that are not in their home. They're using the next door neighbor's internet connection. Now, that is actually a violation of federal law, which is a little bit of a problem. And it should be a little bit disconcerting for the person who is at that other location whose wireless network you're using, because now you're on their network. You can see all of the devices on their network. So that becomes a little bit of a problem. Usually you can take care of this access problem and you can take care of a security issue just by enabling encryption. Turn encryption on your wireless access point, and the only people who would be able to connect to your network are the ones that know the secret passphrases for the encryption. And that also means that since they know the secret passphrase for the encryption, that all of the data itself is also encrypted. So you're killing two birds with one stone there. You're not only restricting access to your network, but you're protecting the data that's on your network. We're going to show you how to do that with our wireless access points. We're going to look at some things you should think about when you're setting up the different encryption types on your wireless access point. If you were to purchase a access point or a wireless router from the store and you bring it home, and you look at the Getting Started guide, what it usually tells you to do is to connect the router to your network. You could plug your computer directly into that router as well. And it usually says, if you'd like to load up some extra software on your workstation, you can connect to that device and you're up and running. And generally speaking, that's absolutely true. What it doesn't tell you is that the default configuration on these devices is to not encrypt, restrict, or disallow any access to that network. It's all too often where we can look at the different neighborhoods driving around and we're on our mobile phone that's able to do wireless connections, and it's popping up all kinds of networks that I'm able to connect to because the default configuration right out of the box is one that does not restrict access and does not encrypt any type of data. You do not want to be in this situation. So what you want to do is connect to your wireless access point or your wireless router. Now, this may take a little bit of doing if you don't recall how it was set up to begin with. Usually the IP address of your router ends in a .1. One easy way to tell usually on your network what is the IP address of my device is to look at the IP configuration of your network card. To easily find the router that we are on this home network that I'm on, one of the very easy ways to figure this out is to use a command at the command line of Windows called ipconfig. Now, if you've never worked at the command line before, it's relatively easy. We're going to go to our Start menu and click Run if you're in Windows XP. If you're in Vista or Windows 7, you can just go to this line at the bottom, type CMD, and hit Enter, and it will launch the CMD command. And we can, from this, type ipconfig. This is our IP configuration utility. It's going to tell us all about the network cards on our machines and what IP configuration is on each of those. Now, your machine is probably going to have a lot fewer Ethernet connections and network cards than mine does. I have a lot of virtual adapters, a lot of VPN adapters, a little bit more than most people will have on theirs. Usually you might have a wireless connection and a wired connection and maybe one other. On my wired connection, where I'm physically connected to this router that's in this place where I am, I've been given an IP address of 192.168.0.9. The one that I'm most interested in seeing, however, is this one that says default gateway. That is the IP address of the router. That is the IP address that has the router and a wireless access point and firewall, that all-in-one device that I have. And its IP address is 192.168.0.1. So that's the number that I need to be able to connect to that device in a browser and look at the configurations. When you're done at the command line, you can type exit and hit enter, and it goes away. From this browser screen, I have already connected to 192.168.0.1. And depending on the router manufacturer and the model of the router that you have, you are going to be asked for a username and password that is maybe different across all of them. And you may have even changed the username and password when you first installed it. If this is a default configuration, you can almost always go out to the manufacturer's website, download the manuals for that particular model of router, and it will tell you inside of there, this is the default username and the default password. On this device, I don't even remember what the default is. On another Linksys device, you don't even use a username. You just use the password of admin. Just depends on the device and what that setting is. Once you know the username and password, you can connect to this. If you have forgotten your username and password, all of these devices have on the back of them a small reset port. And if you've completely forgotten your username and password, you've tried and you can't remember it, the only way that you're going to be able to recover that is to hold down that reset button on the back until your router resets, and then you're going to have to start fresh from the very beginning and figure out exactly the configuration and redo the configuration that you have inside of your machine. Now, once you know your IP address and you know the username and password to get into your router, you're going to get a screen that looks like this or something like this. This is the Netgear device. I've got some others that we're going to look at. And you can see the default configuration. It may have a setup wizard on there that tries to configure devices. We're not interested in doing any of those things. There's a setting in here called wireless settings. For the purposes of this podcast, we're going to focus only on the wireless pieces of this. There's many different things that we could configure inside of these devices. They are some relatively complex networking devices that really have a lot of power inside of them and can do quite a number of things. But we're just going to focus on the wireless piece. Let's look at some of these major settings that are on here so that you become more accustomed to what you would expect to see if you were to connect to one of these devices. Now, the first thing is the service set identification name, something called an SSID, which is just a horrible name for somebody who is plugging this in their house. It's great if you're technical and you know what the SSID happens to be. That's really just the name of this wireless network that you're setting up. My wireless network has an odd little name associated with it, but that helps me figure out where this wireless network is versus anything else that might be out there. And I'm pretty sure nobody's going to duplicate my name. Now, this is in the United States region, and that's important because the different regions around the world are able to communicate at different frequencies. This becomes pretty important because that wireless access point in the wireless router, it's a radio. It's sending out a signal, and your computer has to be listening in on exactly the same frequency, just like your radio might be. If you're listening to FM radio, you have to be right on that frequency to be able to hear it properly. And then you're going to see something like a channel. And I'm on channel 11. You have the choice of 1 through 11, but almost always we use channels 1, channel 6, and channel 11. Let me show you why. This is an interesting little utility. It's from a company called MetaGeek that focuses on making troubleshooting and analysis tools for wireless networks. So if you're somebody who installs a lot of wireless networks, you're somebody that needs to troubleshoot a lot of wireless networks, some really nice low cost but extremely functional wireless troubleshooting capabilities. This is a free tool that you can download and run on your computer called Insider. There's that SSID right in the middle. And that's what this focuses on, is finding what wireless networks are out there in the world right now. If you want to know more about this, you can always go to metageek.net and download your own copy of Insider. What this gives you is across the top a list of all of the different networks that my wireless card inside of my laptop sitting next to me is able to see. Then it gives me a representation of what channels those wireless networks are communicating on. And then I get a real-time view of that signal strength so I can see over time how's the signal strength been. And since this is a laptop, I could even walk around with this. I could pop this open anywhere I happen to be and see what's going on. There are a lot of different networks that I've been able to see. Some are called Netgear, some are called Linksys, some are called Linksys In. These are probably access points that we can see that have been set up to do nothing but the default configuration. And you can see here there's even a little icon that tells you what is the signal strength and is it locked, which means is it a protected network? And then you can see the ones that have no lock next to them. Those are completely open networks. So this may be one at a house next door. It may be one down the street. We're seeing the signal come through and we can see the SSIDs. We can see that I'm actually listed twice here. That's because I have two wireless access points in my network, not just one. I have a wireless router and a wireless access point. There's another one called Happy, which I have no idea where Happy is. A low signal strength. It's not in my house. It's somewhere else. It is protected though. So what will be important to me is to know, am I picking the right channel to be on? And that's what this view down here gives me. It gives me a view of exactly who's on channel 1, who's on channel 6, and who's on channel 11. And you'll notice there's overlap here. And even though there is a channel 2, 3, 4, 5, and a channel 7, 8, 9, and 10, I told you nobody really uses those. That's because the signal itself has such overlap across those different channels that in the United States, we tend to focus on just using channel 1, just using channel channel 6 and just using channel 7 so that we don't overlap with anybody who might be outside of those particular channels. Now, I can also see here in my house, I have my local router, which I'm pretty much sitting next to, is right here. I have another wireless access point in my house that's down here. So you can see there's definitely no overlap there. But you can see there is a wireless access point called Netgear that comes from somewhere in my neighborhood. There's this other one called Happy that's also on channel 1, the Netgear here on channel 11. And then I've got a bunch here on channel 6. That tends to be the default channel for almost all of the different access points that you're going to find. And that's usually why I choose channel 1 or channel 11 to make sure that I don't conflict with anything else. Now, this Linksys in and this Linksys, which has such a strong signal strength, happen to be these test units that I've got in my lab. They are not usually turned on, so usually you won't see those on this particular view, but it certainly shows you that if you are on a network and you are the Linksys device and you plug in and you're not getting very good throughput, that's because right on top of you is another Linksys device from somewhere else that's also sending out a signal. And if those are communicating at the same time, they're going to create a problem for you. So that's not really a security issue so much, other than seeing where the other access points are and are they open or closed. And you can also validate if you are properly locking up your access points, but it also helps you with efficiency and throughput. So as long as you're not sharing the same frequencies as someone else, you'll have the best possible experience over your wireless network. Back to our access point, you can see channel 11 is chosen here. We'll just leave it at channel 11. That sounds good. The mode here refers to the different technologies of wireless. We started off with a technology called 802.11b, and the latest type of networking technology is 802.11n. So we've gone from B and G all the way to N. And on this particular access point, it allows you to do B and G, which are kind of the low speed and medium speed in today's wireless technologies. If we had N, it would be even faster, which is also a nice capability. As we look down a little bit, you can also see some security options here. You definitely don't want to be disabled. This is the encryption piece, and you want to be sure on your access point that you at least have some encryption enabled. On this particular access point, one thing to note is the encryption type on my network is WEP, Wired Equivalent Privacy. This is a very old encryption methodology. In fact, it is so old that from a cryptography perspective, it's actually been cracked. It is a version of encryption that is not very secure. So at a very bare minimum, I do not recommend using WEP for Wired Equivalent Privacy. That is not a good idea. At a minimum, you should be using something called WPA, and ideally, it would be something called WPA2, which is the most modern version of WPA. That stands for Wi-Fi Protected Access Pre-Shared Key. It is a much more protected, a much more efficient encryption. It's a better encryption to use on your wireless networks. If you have the option of WPA2, that is the one that is the most recent version of WPA, and I highly recommend using that one. We're going to look at some access points in a moment that uses that encryption. I'll show you how to configure those. With the WPA, you're going to get different configurations. My passphrase on the screen is grayed out. You're not able to see it, but if you'd like to change it, just type in any passphrase here and just remember what that is. You're going to make sure the passphrase that's on your wireless access point matches what's going to be on your wireless settings inside of your laptop or your desktop machine. So this is an important part of what we're doing, is setting up this encryption and making sure that whatever we configure into our firewall is going to match the way that we're going to use on our workstation, and at a very minimum, not using WEP. That's probably the biggest thing you can take away from this configuration right here. I've got some other access points here. Let's go to this middle one. This is a travel router. It's this very small wireless router that you can use when you travel around. So if you're on a wired network, you can plug this in and now you're wireless inside of your hotel room, for instance. It's got different configurations. Boy, a lot of different things you can do here. You can change the wireless options, security options, access restrictions, application and gaming options, the administration of the device. Let's ourselves focus on what the options are for the security. I'm going to look at my wireless settings here. So if we click on wireless, it'll take us to basic wireless settings, wireless security, a MAC filter, and some advanced wireless settings. Let's quickly go through these. The wireless is enabled. The network mode can be B or G. We've already talked about those. There's the SSID. So this is that Linksys device we saw. Let's change the name of this device from something other than Linksys. I always recommend making your SSID something unique to you. That way nobody can accidentally connect to your network thinking it's theirs, for instance. So this might be the Professor network. I'm going to change the channel. No, let's leave it on 6 because that way I'll be able to see it a little better than the other networks. And I already have a network 1 and a network 11 in my network, so network 6 works fine. Now, this other connection here, SSID broadcast, that selection is also a bit of a security type connection or a security option. What this is, if you were to bring up a machine, a laptop, a computer, a wireless phone, and have it look for networks that are out there, it'll bring back a list of names. You've probably seen this before. If your broadcast is enabled, your name will be included in that list. If your broadcast is disabled, your name will not be included in that list. And now that doesn't mean that someone can't connect to your network. They can manually type in your SSID, the name of your wireless network, and connect. Just keeping that in mind, that this is not really a security issue. It's more of a convenience issue than anything else. And leaving it enabled at the end of the day doesn't really make you any more or less secure than anything else in the big picture of things. The thing you want to be able to do is enable encryption. And as you can tell, this is the default configuration for this travel router. The encryption is disabled. So let's click wireless security here. And the security modes on this particular device have more options. This is a newer piece of hardware. We don't want to do WEP, but you can see there's multiple versions of WPA. There's a WPA personal, a WPA2 personal, and a WPA2 mixed. This refers to not only the WPA2 methodology of connecting and encrypting data, but it also talks about the ways that that data is encrypted. Usually WPA2 personal gives you the best encryption type and is most compatible with the devices that we find in today's modern networks. You can see it uses an encryption type called AES. We're not going to dive into the specifics of that. And we have an option here to put in a passphrase so that we're able to connect. Again, the passphrase we put in our wireless access point has to match the passphrase that's on our workstation. Very simple. Now, if you go to a higher end wireless device, I have one here. This is a Linksys device that is a WRVS 4400N. This has a VPN connectivity. It's really designed for a smaller home office configuration that needs a lot of different functionality. And if we go to the wireless configuration on this device, you can see we have these names that look very similar to what we've seen before. An SSID name. There's that Linksys-N. Let's call this Professor-N so I can really see what it is. The wireless mode can be BG or N. This particular access point can do N type of network technology, so I go even faster. The slow, the medium, and the really fast. And N today is really fast. And you can see it's running at channel 6. We can go anywhere from channel 1 through channel 11. And it even puts the frequencies there in case, I guess, that interests you. Really doesn't help very much when you're somebody at home. There's your SSID broadcast. And again, wireless security, we're starting to see things that look very similar to things we've seen before. WP, WPA, and notice this one has WPA Enterprise. That's because this was designed to work in larger environments. And what it's able to do is to query a third-party device to allow you authentication and access to the wireless network. That is really designed for enterprise-type environments, something you'd never see. Again, WPA2 Personal tends to be the most compatible and the one we see the most, and certainly the best security you'll see because it's running WPA2. So this is a pretty good mix of being not only secure, but also making sure we can have as many devices on the wireless network as possible. Now that we've configured our access point, we've made sure that we've got, at a bare minimum, WPA. Hopefully the WPA2 Personal is what you're running on your access point. We've checked to make sure we're not going to conflict with any other devices out there right now for frequencies and the different channel settings on our access point or our router. And now what we'd like to do is configure our local workstation. And generally, this is something built into the operating system that makes it very easy. If you've acquired a device from Linksys, from Netgear, from D-Link, Those devices usually also have a piece of client software that they include with this, or that you can download from their website, that provides a nice front end and allows you, in some cases, some additional capabilities for connecting to that manufacturer's device. The vast majority of connections to these wireless access points can be done without having to load any additional software onto your workstation. You can simply use the capabilities that were built into Windows. And it really doesn't matter if you'd like to use that manufacturer's software and you've already got it loaded and that's what you're using, that's fine. I have both in my environment. I use the Windows front end, and I have another device where I use my Netgear software to be able to connect. It's really just a personal preference, and if it works, it works. It's usually not something you'd have to change. What we want to be able to be sure that we are doing, though, is that we are connecting to the correct wireless device. And that becomes pretty important. We've already seen on the view of all of these different networks that are out there around my neighborhood that there's a lot of different networks out there. So I want to be sure when I connect to a wireless network that it really is my wireless network. And we want to do that for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want to use somebody else's network connection. That's just simply not allowed. It is a violation of federal law. It's not something that usually get arrested over. It's something people tend to do a lot. Usually it's only really something that they'll come after you if you're doing something bad on someone's network. But that really is a concern. If they have not protected their wireless network, you would be allowed access onto that wireless network. And perhaps more importantly, you now have access to all of the devices on their wireless network. You can see their printer. You can see their drive shares. You can see the different hard drives and how they've opened up access to those devices. That may not be exactly what they would like to have happen either. So if you know a neighbor and you see and you recognize where that might be worth mentioning to them in passing that, oh, I noticed your wireless access point was open. I was configuring mine. You may want to consider taking your wireless access point and protecting it as well. Send them over to this podcast. Have them watch this. They'll know everything they need to know about protecting their network. Once you connect to the wireless network and you're on your Windows device, you probably have a connection that you can click on at the bottom that's going to show you all of the different networks out there. In fact, you can see my network that I'm connected to. There's my Linksys network and my Linksys in. I didn't save the configuration for that professor and the professor in network, so we don't see those names pop up yet. So from here, you can easily connect to a network and decide what you would like to do. And if you connect to it and it is protected, it will prompt you. It'll give you a pop-up box that says, what is the secret key for this network? And you have to type it in exactly the way you typed it in on your access point. So if you typed it in all caps on your access point, it needs to be in all caps on your computer or on your wireless device. They have to match exactly. And as long as you match exactly, you'll get something like this one that says that it's connected. And then at that point, you're completely encrypted. You'll know that the connection that you have back and forth to that device is one that nobody else is going to be able to tap into. Nobody else is going to be able to grab those packets out of the air and read what's going on. You'll have no problem being very secure with sending information back and forth over that network. In Windows, when you first connect to a device, let's say we connect to that Linksys network. I haven't been on this Linksys network before. So when it connects to that network, it's going to pop up a screen for me that asks me what I would like this network to be like. When I first connect to this network, you're going to get a pop-up box here that asks you what location is this Linksys network. Is it a home network? Is it a work network? Or is it a public network? So this is something new that you have in Windows Vista or Windows 7. This was not in Windows XP. But I'm going to show you in just a moment how you can help your local firewall know where you are connected. So it says, are you on a home network? If so, you can trust everybody on your wireless network. Are you on a work network? Maybe we don't want to trust everything out there if you're on a work network. Or are you on a public network, which means you don't want to trust anybody else out there. You don't want anybody else having access to your computer. And you can choose either one of those to be able to set this up and make sure that when you're on the network, you are really as protected as you can be. And that really works in conjunction with a local firewall that's running in Windows. Let's look at this idea of personal firewalls and how they can help you be more secure on your wired and your wireless network. If you have a wireless connection into your home, into your office, that wireless connection is DSL, it's a cable modem, it's a satellite link, whatever it is, I highly recommend that you get a hardware-based firewall. This is this firewall/router/access point device we've been talking about. If you buy a wireless router, that is a firewall. That's the type of thing you're going to want to have if you have that connection. You do not want to plug in your computer directly to that internet connection without having some type of security device in between. At a bare minimum at a house, you should absolutely have one of these hardware-based firewalls. These hardware-based firewalls give you quite a number of advantages. First is the protection of every device on your network, all your wireless devices, all your wired devices. It prevents anybody from the internet from directly accessing any of those devices. That becomes extremely important when there are operating system vulnerabilities with the way that people can access, or perhaps you just forgot and you left a certain section of your hard drive available as an open share. And that means that anybody coming over your internet connection could see that. There's also very high speed here because it's its own standalone piece of hardware. You can generally have a really nice high-speed connection that many people inside of your home network can connect to. One of the disadvantages, however, is that if you do need to have that device scanning or looking at data, everything going across is encrypted. So that becomes a little more complicated in those types of scenarios. However, if you're trying to protect things on your wireless network and make sure that you are as protected as possible, that actually may not be a disadvantage. That may be an important thing for you. And another, if you can call this a disadvantage, it's yet another device you're plugging into your network, another thing you've got to plug into the wall. But these days, they're very small devices. It's not like this takes up a lot of room. And you plug in, it's very, very quiet. It's completely silent. There's no fans. You don't even know it's there. The idea is that it would be plugging in, you configure your security, and you just forget all about it. And generally, that's what happens. Another type of firewall that you should also be running at the same time as your hardware-based firewall is a host-based firewall. These are firewalls that run in software that are built into the operating system of your computer. This is something that's going to protect your system also when you leave the confines of your secure network at your house. So this is going to be really useful to you if you have to go to a hotel or you have to go and plug in at a coffee shop. You need to have some way to protect your machine from having anybody hit that or have access to anything on your machine from outside. And that's what your host-based firewall does. It sees all the traffic going through, and since it's on your computer, it sees all of the data as it's decrypted before it's encrypted and sent across your network. And you do have very, very granular control of who has access to your computer and what applications can communicate in and out of your computer. So that gives you a way to provide yet more protection, a little bit more than what you would have, especially if you had no firewall running on your machine at all. If you have many, many, many different computers on your home network or in an enterprise, this becomes a little more complex to manage because you have to go to every single one of these and set them up and get them running. But if you're on a laptop and you're traveling outside of your protected home network, you must have a host-based firewall, a software-based firewall, and you must have it enabled. It's extremely important to keep your system secure and make sure that nobody has access to anything on your computer. If you go to the control panel on your Windows machine, you're going to have an option for the Windows Firewall. Now, this Windows Firewall, you can see, is not turned on my machine because I'm running the firewall that comes with my Norton antivirus system, which is a Norton Internet Complete system. Now, for this particular computer, to have that Norton Firewall running is pretty important for me. But the idea is that whether you are using the Windows built-in, you're using a McAfee firewall, you're using a Norton firewall, you're using a Trend firewall, you must have one running somewhere. And you can see that it is up and running and configured and connected to these networks. So you want to be sure, no matter what manufacturer's firewall you're running, that it is running, it is up and connected onto your machine, and that it's able to activate and use the things that are running across your network. Here's my Norton configuration. You can see for the network settings here, my smart firewall, my intrusion prevention, my email protection is all turned on. If we want to look at the settings for this firewall configuration, we can start to learn more about how it is protecting information across my network. And I can see all of these settings, for instance, on the web. I have download intelligence and browser connections. I have connections for email, instant messaging, intrusion prevention, a network security map, and how it's communicating out on the network. These are ways that these built-in devices, these built-in personal firewalls are able to protect how people connect to my machine. And if they try to connect to my machine, what are they going to be able to see? It's really important that we have these personal firewalls available, especially if we're leaving the house. You can almost get away with not running one if you have a physical hardware router firewall access point in your network. But as soon as you leave your house, it's going to be incredibly important to have this running on your system. Here's a screenshot from the Windows firewall. I wanted to show you that one as well. So if you're running one in Windows, you'll have rules that look like this. Every single one of these rules was added automatically by the applications that communicate out of your network. And the way that it works is when the application tries to communicate out, it opens up a hole through that firewall so that it's able to communicate and therefore also able to communicate back in. When that application closes, it closes the hole. So that way you have this dynamic firewall that is constantly protecting you, only allowing out what's supposed to go out, only allowing in what's supposed to go in. And when you aren't using that application, there's no way people can communicate inside of your computer at all. It's exactly the type of security you want, especially when you're on a wireless network somewhere else. Hopefully now you've seen that configuring the wireless settings on your wireless access point or your wireless router, not too difficult. Just a few settings, a few certain things you have to be sure are configured. Just a couple of settings and configurations on your workstation and your other devices, and you're going to be as safe as you can possibly be anytime you're surfing the web, downloading media files, watching movies, or anything else. If you'd like to give us a message, you can always send me an email, james@themobileclassroom.com. We're also on Facebook, so you can be informed immediately whenever we put out a new version, a new edition of our podcast. You can also watch us on Twitter at twitter.com/mobileclassroom. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next time on the Mobile Classroom.